Okay, so welcome everybody. So we will get started. I'm Howard Friedman. I'm the director of the Jewish Community Library in San Francisco, and I'm really happy to welcome you to tonight's program, celebrating the publication of Modern Judaica, Today's Makers, Today's Sacred Objects, with editor Jim Cohen and 3 terrific Bay Area Judaica artists featured in the book, Harriete Estel Berman, Aimee Golant and Lisa Rauchwerger. And I'd like to thank the Friends of the Jewish Community Library for making what we do possible. I hope you'll consider becoming a friend by giving at any level at friendsofthejcl.org. And I'd like to dedicate tonight's program to the memory of Susan Felix, a spirited Judaica artist in our community who modeled what it means to put art at our life's center. We lost Susan this past Saturday, but she'll continue to inspire many of us. Before we begin, some quick technical notes. Automated closed captioning can be turned on or off by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Everybody but our presenters will be muted, but after the presentation, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers, and you can feel free to put whatever questions you have in the chat, whether for an individual artist or for the group, and I will do my best to relay them to our presenters, time permitting. I'm now going to call on the book's editor, Jim Cohen, to introduce himself, his art, the book, and the other artists. Jim, thank you for joining us from North Carolina, where it's quite late, and the floor is now yours.
Yeah, I didn't get my nap in today, so but I'm really happy to be here. Thanks, Howard. Thank you for inviting me to speak about my book, Modern Judaica, Today's Makers and Today's Sacred Objects. This project, which I lovingly call my pandemic project, began innocently enough at the American Craft Show in Baltimore in February 2020, right before the pandemic struck. I was an exhibitor and saw a book display. I walked up to a gentleman who I thought was the publisher's rep and asked when they were going to publish a book about Judaica. At that time, it had been 10 or 11 years since a survey type book had been published. I had forgotten the axiom, be careful what you ask for. We chatted for a moment. I gave him a card and went back to my booth. Later that day, the rep, Pete Schiffer, stopped at my booth. Only then did I put 2 and 2 together and determined that it was his company, Schiffer Publishing, that I had talked to originally. We talked some more and he asked me to submit a proposal. The die was cast. A few months later, I received a contract and was off and running, too ignorant to be scared. In putting this project together, I developed a motto for the project. Jewish art tells the story. Judaica lives the story. I truly believe that. I believe that rituals surrounding Judaism or any other religion are critical to the continuation of the religion, and that Judaica is critical to our rituals, whether they be at the home, the synagogue, or a community setting. My initial thoughts were for a coffee table type book, 200 to 300 pages of luscious photos, representing lots of different objects and artists. I have a lot of books like that. I buy them, look at them once or twice, and allow them to gather dust. But I wanted more from my book. I decided to approach this project from 2 different perspectives at the same time. The people who make Judaica, and then the Judaica itself. Oh, by the way, I do have between 200 and 300 pages and an equal number of luscious photographs in the book. A few words on process. I sent out emails to artists I knew, people they referred me to, membership lists of organizations, artists from other books and other sources. Not everyone answered the mail. Ultimately, I chose all the artists and the images that are in the book. They are my choices. I'm confident that any of you would have chosen some of the same artists and even some of the same images, and that none of you would have made identical choices. After all, there are no right or wrong choices. I conducted Zoom interviews, which were recorded, transcribed, and edited with each of these individuals. They come from the United States and 6 foreign countries. 18 of the individuals I think in the book are from overseas. We talked about who they are, why they do this, and their work themselves, the work itself. I found one constant in all the interviews I conducted. The artists had passions for their medium, passion for how they view Judaism, and passions for Judaica. Before turning the program over to the three Bay Area artists whose work I was proud to present in the book, Harriete Estel Berman, Aimee Golant, and Lisa Rauchwerger, I want to take a minute or two to discuss a few pieces of work that I really appreciate. One from an aesthetic perspective, one from a ritualistic perspective, and one from a social commentary perspective. The first piece is from Cynthia Ide, a silversmith from Lexington, Massachusetts. Let me see if I can make this work. Hopefully I can. Well, this is not working. All right. Just a minute. I'm sorry, I should have practiced a little bit more beforehand. My apologies. What I'm trying to show you is an absolutely stunning sterling silver 5-place Seder plate. And it's from Sylvia Ide, silversmith in Lexington, Massachusetts. Cynthia is a convert to Judaism. She describes that process thusly. I talked to the rabbi and began taking classes. I timed my conversion so that it would be between my son's bar mitzvahs. I had grown into Judaism, and it seemed silly to live it and not to be it. I accomplished the mission I wanted, which was for my children to grow up having a set of values and a sense of God and Judaism. This is a sterling silver Seder plate. The simple elegance of this piece struck me the first time I saw it. It continues to impress me every time I look at the images of it.
Jim, can you try to, if you unshare your screen, and we can't see any of the images. So if you could try to, there you go.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's all I had to do. I'm sorry. This is a sterling silver plate. It has spaces for 5 religious foods, 5 ceremonial foods. But this plate is, Cynthia related an interesting anecdote about this. After she made it, she took it to her rabbi and asked him what he thought. He looked at it and he said he didn't believe it was a Seder plate because it only had 5 places for food, for ceremonial foods. So if you get the book, contrast that anecdote with the thoughts of the rabbi blacksmith, Ben Kramer of Congregation Moriah in Deerfield, Illinois, and here a modern Orthodox rabbi, Rabbi Kramer, thinks that Seder plates should also only have 5 plates, and he's very adamant about it. The second piece, entitled A Sign Upon Your Hand. Can you see this?
Yes.
Entitled A Sign Upon Your Hand is described as an arm bracelet, phylacteries, or tefillin by a young Israeli artist, Tamar Paley. Her work challenges some of the perceptions of roles and restrictions on women when they practice Judaism. She describes herself as a proud, Reformed Jewish woman. As she was concluding studies at Shanker College of Engineering, Design, and Art in Tel Aviv, she chose as her thesis topic, Ritual Objects for Women. It allowed her to address issues critical to her, as gender inequality, religious pluralism, freedom, and the connection of those issues to concepts like ritual, spirituality, identity, and Jewish thought. About Judaica, Tamar says, in Israel, it has a bad rap. In the larger design community, it's not always perceived as high design, but mainly kitsch. I believe that Judaica needs to be seen as something breathing, contemporary, up to date. I think that in order to keep our traditions vibrant and alive, we need to reflect on them and make sure they suit us and our needs, how they will enhance our Judaism and beliefs, our lives. If they don't evolve, they will become a thing of the past, not something passed on. The final piece I want to share with you tonight is by New York architect Alan Wexler. It's the Sabbath cell phone synthesizer. There we go. He describes himself as not an Orthodox Jew, but one who loves traditions. He said there were 3 days a year, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when he did not use his cell phone or check email, and those provided the inspiration for this piece. He sees Judaica as the architecture of ritual. I want to quote from his chapter in the book. He says, "It is performance in real time and space. Judaica is not about the past. It's really current. If you have a piece of Judaica that has been passed down generation to generation, it ties you to all those past events, and that's quite touching." I hope my comments and the comments of the artists following will whet your appetite, not only for the book, but whet your appetite to have your own explorations into Judaica. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to Harriete. Harriete, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much to Jim and Howard for including me in this presentation today. I'm honored to be part of this book with all these other Judaica artists and featured in Modern Judaica. All of my artwork and Judaica is made from recycled tin cans. Here you can see in my studio thousands of tin cans that have been opened up, flattened, and organized.
Harry, I
Yeah.
think you need to share the.
Okay, sorry. Right. There we go. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. In my studio, you can see all the thousands of tin cans that I have opened and flattened to organize by color, pattern, and theme. I have an extensive metalworking background. I use traditional metalworking skills, and I have an academic education as well in metalsmithing. People often ask how I open my tin cans. I buy every kind of tin snips and shears you can possibly imagine. This is one of my favorite tools. It's instrumental for fabricating most of my metalwork. It's a bending brake for folding and bending metal. And it was used for this Judaica, this Kiddush cup right here. The Kiddush cup, the title is Vahavati, a Kiddush cup for Elijah. It was fabricated with the bending brake out of tin boxes for the Jewish National Fund. I remember these boxes as a child where we collected charity, 1 coin, nickel, and dime at a time for the restoration of Israel. And here you can see some examples of what sometimes is called tzedakah or pushka boxes from the 20th century. All of my work is made out of recycled tin cans, and the tin cans are really important for content in my work. Here along the spine of the book, you can see that it includes spice tins. It says superior spices, and the title is, "And There Is Light." There are 14 pages to this book. This is the 7 pages of the biblical narrative for the days of creation. And here are the 7 days of man's creation. Many of the pages actually use spice tins because the selection of the tin cans includes very important content for the work. And we're going to look at this one page. The 4th day of creation as the stars, the celestial heavens, the sun and the moon, and the man's construct of time is a clock. And as you can see, it uses spice tins for this abstract clock. In this next page, you can see the tower of the Golden Gate Bridge, constructed from antique spice tins from Schilling Spice in San Francisco. And looking at the book, you can see that the spice box is removed. It normally nestles into the final page of the week, the day of rest, Shabbat. In these candlesticks, which you see right here, the title is "In Your Light, I See Light." It was constructed using partially, at least this Milky Way tin, which had a cobalt blue background and these white 6-pointed stars. So I used a lot of blue and white tins. Working with the tin cans is a very difficult material and takes all the 35 years of experience I've collected using tin cans. And on the left, you can see where I found a tin with small Jewish lettering, which was very hard to find. In this Seder plate for Passover, the title is Eons of Exodus. You can see the figures cut from tin cans as the exodus of the Jewish people for 2,000 years as they walk around this Seder plate. In the silhouette and behind each one of these figures from the 2,000 years of the Exodus are architecture from the time and place where the figures came from. I'm going to show you 2 examples of the extensive research that I made for this piece. We're going to focus on these 2 illustrations. They're from medieval Germany, and it shows the Jewish characters wearing a pointed hat. Now, the pointed hats in Germany in the Middle Ages changed over time, but the purpose of these hats was that the people wearing the hats would be easily identified as Jewish, so they could not assimilate into society. You can see them on the side of the Seder plate with the architecture of medieval Germany behind them. In this next example of my research, you can see the figures in black and white photos on Ellis Island. Look at the center photo where you look at the lady and she's carrying her carpet bag and umbrella, and the figure is on the end of my Seder plate. Or look at this black and white photo of the figures on Ellis Island. They're cut out of tin cans. They're turned around, so all the figures go from left to right around the Seder plate. And behind the figures, you can see the architecture of Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty, all cut out from metallic tin cans. If you're interested in finding out more about this Seder plate, you can look on my website, and the program here will be providing that link to you. KQED, our local PBS television station, produced a video which included my Seder plate, and I talk about it. I'm going to show this particular piece that celebrates the holiday of Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat is a holiday that focuses around fruit trees. The title is Reduce, Reuse, Recycle. But if you look in the center of the plate, you'll see that there's a Jewish star. And if you shine a light into the center of the plate, it actually reflects light to the ceiling. Now we're going to look at some other features of the Seder plate, which was based on the 3 arrows of the recycling symbol, which you can see right there. Remember, all of my work is from post-consumer trash. Here is a CAD/CAM rendering of the very complex structure. And my son helped me do the CAD/CAM work for this piece. And there's the finished example. The title, Reduce, Reuse, Recycle, also refers to the 3 Hebrew words for the fruits celebrated during Tu B'Shvat. Now, this is the biblical idea of fruit and has nothing to do with our 20th century idea of biology. The first fruit celebrated in Tu B'Shvat is fruit in which you eat the outside and you throw away the seed. And here is the example of olives. The second fruit is fruit in which you remove the exterior and you eat the seeds, such as in this pomegranate example. And the third fruit combines both. You can see that it has both grapes and figs on this example. That's where you consume both the fruit, the inside and the outside. So here's the holiday, celebrates the holiday of Tu B'Shvat and uses metallic tins for the background. If you're interested in finding out more information about the fabrication of my work, go to the website. Most of the pieces have images of the fabrication of the artwork. Here I am assembling this piece in the metallic background with 10-karat gold rivets. This is the most recent piece of Judaica that I've made. It specifically refers to the rabbi in San Francisco, Rabbi Noah Kushner. Her quote from an interview said, "They whisper names to me. I am a channel." She's represented by the Sutro Tower, an iconic landmark in San Francisco, because she believed that she was a communicator from her congregation to God. You can see the menorah on the bottom of the windowsill. If you're interested in more information, there's a 2-minute and 21-second video produced by Craft in America for the PBS website, and that's also on my website. The final piece we're going to look at is this Seder plate, titled "Place Before Us the Symbols of Pesach." This signature aspect of my Seder plates, and this somewhat ties into or contradicts what Jim was talking about, is that I put an orange on my Seder plate. So that means a minimum of 6 objects. The orange is a symbol of inclusion for women in religious leadership, along with gay, lesbian, and transgender participation in Judaism. Here is a photo of the permanent collection of the Jewish Museum of Berlin that includes my Seder plate in this enormous display of over 50 pieces of Judaica that'll be up until 2035 if you get to see the Jewish Museum in Berlin. And my Seder plate, I appreciate so much that I've been included in this book, and thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thanks, Harry. We're going to turn it over to Aimee now.
Sure.
Thank you, Harriet. That was amazing. Can everyone hear me? I've been familiar with Harriet's work since I first started working with metal, and she never disappoints. So thank you so much. Okay, so I'll start mine now. Can people see my screen? The weird thing is I can't.
Yeah, you want to have the one, we can see the screen, but you want to have the feature, the slide to just.
Why is it so small?
We're seeing everything in the window. You want to just start the slideshow to.
I can hardly see my, okay, let's see if I can, no?
Can play.
Is that working?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. So I'll start also with a few thank yous. First of all, I wanted to, of course, thank Jim Cohen for creating this book and creating a situation where we Judaica artists have a voice and we can speak about our work and show our work. And of course, I wanted to thank the Jewish Community Library and Jewish Learning Works and Howard and everyone for having us, as well as Harriet and Lisa. So, oh, that didn't work. Let's see. Okay, here we go. So I thought I'd talk just a little bit about why I started making Judaica in the first place. So I am a granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, and pictured here are my grandparents, Arthur and Mary Kleinhandler. And I grew up hearing the stories of the suffering and everything they went through just in the name of being Jewish, and it affected me deeply. When I was in college, I was studying Holocaust and genocide, and I started taking a metal arts class. And so as I was interviewing my grandparents for the Holocaust class, my grandfather started giving me his tools. And so there's some of his tools there. And in this class, I have a wonderful teacher, Dawn Nakanishi, who asked me to express myself without using a cliche. And that's when my first mezuzot came to be. So in this picture, I'm showing you my first mezuzot. So it's the 3 here with barbed wire and jail bars and flames. So clearly I was barely a teenager, barely out of being a teenager at the time. And I was processing what my Jewish identity was. And that was juxtaposed on top of these ritual objects. And in sharing the work with the class, I burst into tears. How could there be a God given the Holocaust? But there was nothing that I did that in that time in my life and up until then that made me feel more like I was doing what I was supposed to do. And, using my grandfather's tools and making Judaica and preserving these traditions just felt like nothing I'd ever experienced. The barbed wire mezuzah ended up taking on a life of its own. Here's a replica of the original that I made, and it was commissioned by the 1939 Club, which is a group of Holocaust survivors and their descendants in Los Angeles. They were looking for something that symbolized the Holocaust to give to the first Israeli astronaut, Ilan Ramon. Ilan Ramon's mother was an Auschwitz survivor, and he wanted something to commemorate the Holocaust and asked the club. So I was commissioned to do that. Unfortunately, it didn't come back because the shuttle crashed, but I was then commissioned a second time by his friend from flight school, Mike Massimino, who was going to repair the Hubble telescope and wanted something to commemorate his dear friend. And so Ilan Ramon's wife, Rona Ramon, approached me about making another mezuzah, barbed wire mezuzah. And of course I did. And that mission was successful, and he came back with the mezuzah, and now it is in Israel on display at the Mitzpeh Ramon Museum, which is honoring Ilan Ramon. Of course, I wanted to talk about the pieces that are on the cover. So I was really beyond touched that Jim chose these pieces to be on the cover. And one of the reasons why was because of what they stood for. So these were the Torah crowns for the Women's Torah Project, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. But basically, a very small congregation in Seattle called Kadima didn't have a Torah. And when they realized that women had never in any recorded history actually scribed a Torah, they were inspired to open the door for women to become Torah scribes. So in thinking about the idea for the crown or the rimonim, the finials, I intentionally wanted it to be different than, an average decoration for the Torah. It's more of a functional sculpture. It's about warmth, community, dialogue, and sort of giving and receiving information, sharing Torah. So I'll explain a little bit more about the Women's Torah Project so you have a deeper understanding. In the picture are some of the scribes and then some other women that are trained scribes that did the checking. The Torah is on the table there, and this picture was taken when we gathered in Seattle to sew it up in community. So I got to help sew a Torah and symbolically scribe one of the last letters. So this Torah was the first Sefer Torah created and embellished by an international community of women. There's 6 Sofrut, or female Torah scribes, writing the Women's Torah in the US, Israel, Canada, and Brazil. So there was a lot of coordinating, and the project took a long time. There were 7 international artists creating the accoutrements. And this first women scribes Sefer Torah opened the door for other women to become scribes. And those women completed their own Torahs before ours was done. But this was sort of the door opener. So just to give you a little bit more about the Torah and its art. So here you can see my crowns, and then here are the Eitz Chaim, or the rollers, and this is all inlaid inlay work. And this is a beautiful wooden yod that's used as a pointer to read the Torah, all made by women. The artist who made the mantle put out a call for women from all over the world to send in a piece of fabric from a woman that meant something to them. And so the artist took all the fabric and created a book with all the stories about these women, and then took a piece of that fabric and sewed it into the pomegranate seeds on this mantle. And then I just wanted to show you what it looks like on a Torah. I think clearly they're a little more sculptural than functional, but just so you get a view. More on Torah crowns. So this kind of got me thinking about Torah crowns, and also just being a Judaica artist full-time and going out into the world and doing shows and meeting people from all over the world at different walks of life, different religions, different backgrounds. I was always taken with how sharing Judaism had such a flow, and that it could be such an amazing exchange of information about our traditions and other people's traditions. And even on my travels, so my husband and I traveled to Japan, and the word shin was used a lot in the context of religious context. And as you may or may not know, the Hebrew letter shin is found on the mezuzah, and it stands for God. And I've always made things with the Hebrew letter shin. It's like my favorite letter. So being in Japan, I was sort of fascinated, like, what is this shin? What is this version of God? And so I was inspired to create these Torah finials with on the left, that those are in the book, about using the stylized Japanese characters for shin that mean God. And when we say God in Japanese and shin, what do we mean? I mean, what is that? What does that mean? You know? So from my understanding, or what's been explained to me, is that we're talking about like everything and nothing at the same time, which is like the Ein Sof, or something mysterious or supernatural, or the essences and spirits of all things and everything. And these kinds of explanations sound very familiar to me, a lot like ways we might describe God as well. So I made these crowns to open the door to Judaism to more people, and to also to open the dialogue between Jews and other people about God. So for instance, a Chinese or Japanese person would recognize this these symbols for God on top of the Torah and wonder, that must be something religious, but what is that? What is the Torah? So it would give me a reason to open it up and share like, what's the difference between Torah and the Old Testament? A lot of people don't know that there's a difference there, and they don't really understand Jews much at all. So, you know, sort of like a teaching moment. The Torah crowns in the middle are related. They're Hebrew letter shin. And then on the far right here is the wimple clasp I made for this Torah, which I actually have, and it's behind me. And this also says shin in Japanese. It resembles the ventricles of the heart. And it also reminds me of the three branches of the Hebrew letter shin. But this shin represents the heart, core, center, or truth. And to me, that's another sort of metaphor for God. And I have these symbols here. This is part of an installation work that I'm working on. We can talk about that more at another time. Finally, the priestly blessing bracelet. So here also is depicted Hebrew letter shin on the front. My rabbi was asking the Kohanim, or the people that are descended from Aaron, the Kohens, to come up and bless the congregation. I had never done this before, but as it turns out, I'm Bat Cohen, which means I'm daughter of Cohen. And so that qualifies me to come up to the bima and administer this prayer. My rabbi showed me how to do the hand gesture, and you actually make shins with your fingers, and you raise your hands up and you say, Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. You say, may God bless and keep you, to the whole congregation. And this action must have really affected me, because I started having these really intense dreams about the priestly blessing and it appearing on the inside of a bracelet, like making it so that it's private, it's concealed, but it's there. It's like this gift. It's like this very amazing, most loving gift would be to bestow upon somebody this blessing. And after this dream reoccurred in different ways over about a week, I just knew I was going to have to make these bracelets. So this copper plate here shows the etching of the piece before I transformed it into a bracelet and had a mold made, and then they're cast. So that concludes the pieces that I'm going to talk about for today. And I have here a link if you would like to pre-order the book. And yeah, so that's it for me. Thanks, everybody. Oh, wait, Lisa, it's your turn.
Yeah. Thank you, Amy.
You passed the shin.
Now that I've unmuted it, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I just want to also I am in such esteemed company, and I'm very honored and feeling very blessed to be part of this project and this beautiful book. So thank you, Jim and Howard and all the artists who are part of this. So I want to talk a little bit about my process. I also have things to share. So let me see if I can do that. All right. Can everybody see this? Okay, so I wanted to talk about first that I learned paper cutting in college. Also, I'm also fell in love with Hebrew letters, and Amy and I have bonded over the letter Shin because I'm wearing one of her necklaces right now with the Shin on it. I love that letter. And I was an art major, but and a Jewish studies minor. And in college, I went to a camp called BCI, Brandeis Camp Institute, which actually I'm going to stop this for a second. Which was for Jewish college students, and I studied with this master paper cutter there, Jerry Navor, who happened to be the art specialist. And I just completely fell in love. I was already an artist, but I had never done paper cutting. And I just completely, it was like I found my medium. I just fell in love with it. I took to it immediately, and I did my first paper cut there. That was in July '87, and I've been doing it ever since. And then I taught myself calligraphy and started doing fill-in ketubot, and eventually started doing my own commission ketubot, and then started doing paper cut ketubot marriage contracts, and it kind of grew from there. So what I wanted to do is show you a little bit how I do a paper cut, and then some samples. So I will do this again. Forgive me going back and forth. Okay. So I love that my medium is 100% recyclable. It's just paper, and all the scraps are non-toxic, and I love that. The only thing toxic is the knife and the blades which can also be recycled. And I only sometimes cut myself. So I go through a lot of blades. I use just a regular X-Acto knife with a number 11 blade, and go through many, many blades in one paper cut. And I start with just a sketch of the design, and then that sketch turns into a tighter sketch where I sometimes add color, but I figure out what's going to be cut and what's not going to be cut, so it doesn't all fall apart. It's all cut out of a single piece of 2-ply Bristol, acid-free Bristol that I use. That's pretty thick, and I'll explain what this is later. But so I have this design, and then I take my piece of paper and I put the design backwards, face down on my light table, and I put the piece of paper that I'm going to be using face down on the light table, and I turn on the light, and I trace the sketch onto the back of the paper that I'm going to cut out. So everything should be backwards. So this is the piece all ready to cut out, and then I start cutting very carefully, and I go through many, many, many blades. And when it's all done, I have something like this. Now this is forwards. So I cut it out from the back so it's nice and clean and I don't get the smudges on it. And then I take a separate piece of watercolor paper And I put this sketch now face up. I mean, the paper cut, the finished paper cut on the light table face up. And I put a piece of watercolor paper on top of it, face up. And I turn on the light. And this is the only slide I don't have, I apologize. But then the light shines through all the cut spaces. So everything here that's green is my cutting board and is in a negative space. And then I can paint whatever I want over those spaces. And then I get something like this. So then I take the paper cut and put it back on top of the watercolor, and all the jiggity lines go away. And I have this beautiful colored piece. This was done for commissioned by a synagogue in Brooklyn, Park Slope Jewish Center, as a gift to their shaliach from Israel, who was working with them for 3 years. And so we have Brooklyn, and we have Tel Aviv, and we have this kibbutz where the shaliach, where the woman Orly grew up and grew grapes. And we have all these symbols of connection. Here, the holding hands, and these trees here in Brooklyn. A tree grows in Brooklyn. This actually has her husband's name, and her 2 kids are the soccer ball and the flower. And here she is in the middle, bridging the gap. And there's a quote from Rabbi Nachman here that says, "To whatever place I go to the land of Israel." So this was a very, very early piece that had to do with the birth of freedom and the Israelites leaving Egypt. And the waters were, this was inspired by Arthur Waskow's description of the birth of freedom and his midrash. And so this is both, this head can be the child being born with Moses and Miriam here, and the people coming out of Egypt, and the pyramids are also the 10 Commandments. And this is like the mother's stomach and her knees, but then it can also be reversed. And this could be the mother's head, and you're looking at it from her perspective. I'm talking with my hands, but you can't see. and these are her knees, and the bird of freedom is the child being born. And then we have Miriam's timbrel here, and the basket of reeds. And then if you turn it upside down, something always happens with these paper cuts, and something that I never planned. So if you turn it upside down, it actually looks like Pharaoh, which I did not plan. It also kind of looks like Gorbachev, which that was happening. The wall was coming down while I was doing this. One of those crazy things. Okay, this is a more recent Micha Mocha paper cut that I did for a bar mitzvah, where I researched all the critters native to the Red Sea, and then put them all in the waves looking through the walls of water as the people crossed. And this is one I just finished a few days ago for my Cantor's kids, who I tutored for their B'nai Mitzvah, and this is they got to chant Micha Mocha. So we've got a little scuba diver here, and SpongeBob in the sea, because they were in the musicals. But so it's serious and it's fun at the same time. And here we go, the letter Shin, also one of my favorite letters. So this one was done a number of years ago. Also, it's one of my favorite pieces. I did it. It was commissioned by the graduating class of rabbis and cantors from JTS in New York, as a gift to the seminary. And so this is an illustration of a psalm that says that happy is the one whose delight is the teaching of God, who studies that teaching day and night. Here's it's day and night. Such a person is like a tree planted beside streams of water, which brings forth its fruit in season, whose foliage never fades, and whatever it produces thrives. So we have this tree of life, which is also one of the things I do a lot in my work. And here's the Shin again with the Torah scroll. And there are 22 students in the tree. Their heads are here, and the branches are their arms. And the text of Eitz Chaim Hi, she is a tree of life, goes across the top. And then that whole psalm is in the Hebrew in the water here. And the whole thing works as like a yin yang design. And we've got another Shin here, which is the water being absorbed are evaporating up and around. And we even have the Star Trek logo right there in the middle. Always got to get that one in there. Okay. Some of these I'm just going to rush through. This was a paper cut I did for our Rabbi Janet Martyr, who retired last year, or a few years ago. And this was after she gave a talk about her vision for the next 10 years for the synagogue. And this one, Aimee talked about the Women's Torah Project. So this was in conjunction with that. This is for the Women of the Book Torah Project, which was also had some of the same people involved. And this was a Midrashic Torah scroll, which was created by, I think it was 53 Jewish women artists from all over the world. And we each got a Torah Parsha to illustrate in our own style. And so this was done on actual kosher Torah parchment. And then I had to purchase a second piece of parchment for the background that I painted. And this is Vayeshev. This is the Parsha in the middle of the Joseph story. So it reads right to left, and his staff and the Pharaoh's whip and hook form this graph of the highs and lows of the story. And here's the stranger who points the way towards Egypt. And this is his coat of many colors with the pit here and the sheaf of there's a whole page of explanation. I don't have time to go through, but Joseph is represented by the sheaf of wheat that's both attached to the shepherd's staff at the beginning and then in the pit here in Egypt. And then the story of Judah and Tamar is sandwiched in the middle of this Parsha. I know I'm running out of time. Just a few more here. This was a bar mitzvah paper cut. Do not oppress the stranger. This was a Shema paper cut. This was Lech Lach, Debbie Friedman's interpretation of Lech Lecha. And this is one of the pieces that is featured in the book that includes a lot of the blessings for Rosh Chodesh. And it's like the heaven's windows opening up and raining down upon the land. Limitless blessing is what it's called, with the 7 species here. Do I have a couple more minutes or am I out of time?
Sure, right. Yeah, 1 or 2 more minutes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this was definitely my yin yang period. This was called This Is the Day. And this was done for our cantor when she retired. And for another rabbi who served for 25 years. I'm going to show you just a few ketubot. This is paper sculpture. Eitz Chaim Hi. This is not Judaica, but they got in there. This is the Bovine Olympics. I just have to tell you, their names are on the left. We have this is Mushel Kwan, Irina Kauskaya, and Sasha Cowen falling on her tushy. Okay. All right. So ketubot. So this is the 4 seasons in paper cut. And I often do Jerusalem. This is Miriam's Timbrel ketubah. This is our ketubah and the one that's featured in the book as well. And it's got waterfalls. We went hiking in Canada for our after our wedding, and so we've sort of hiked through our ketubah here. And then our Hebrew names are in the trees here and the 4 seasons in the tree. And just other samples of ketubot. I often do paper sculpture and paper cut in the same piece. And that's it. So thank you,
Lisa,
for letting me share.
Thank you, Lisa. It's been very interesting. They're beautiful pieces, and I'm sure we would. And I also said out to everybody that you were also the author of a Jewish children's cookbook. I don't know if you try to suppress that from everybody, but I think it's an interesting thing because I'm a foodie. So Howard, do we have any questions from the audience?
Not yet, but now is my time to invite anybody who would like to ask a question of the artist to put it in the chat. Maybe I'll start with one, which is, it strikes me that all of you are engaged in, well, first of all, I just want to thank you. This was just fantastic. And it was also just such a pleasure to see all of your work. It's just great. And because you're all involved in particularly labor-intensive artistic endeavors, I'm curious about the process and whether you would describe it as you create, whether you feel that it's sort of a religious experience to create these pieces. We're seeing these final products, or whether it really just feels like labor, and what your process is in the creation, or what the feeling from your process is.
I will answer in the fact that I think the labor-intensive effort is sometimes frustrating. I consider the fabrication, though, more of my religious observation rather than a religious experience.
I'll answer slightly differently. It depends on the piece. Okay, each piece is unique. And as you're entering into prayer, you often set your kavanah, or your intention. And so depending on what's going on with the piece, I will enter in with an intention, and I will try to keep that intention or that person or that idea in mind as I'm creating. Some pieces are really hard to make. Yes. Most of the time I'll have an idea and I'll see it in my mind as a finished piece, and I'll know what to do. Even if it's hard, I'll still know what I need to do. And for me, most of the time, metal work is an escape. It's a place where I can go and be in the material and not be anywhere else.
When I became a metalsmith about 25, 30 years ago, leaving the career of the law, it became a different world altogether to me. Working with my hands versus dealing with only books and issues of the mind really changed a lot in my own well-being. I think that, to me, there are two types of pieces I make. I make lots of mezuzahs, and they're production pieces, and I find them boring to make. But you want to have something that people will buy at the same time. And so I make very relatively inexpensive, interesting mezuzahs. But when you make something that's separate, like you raise a Kiddush cup, I make some Miriam's and Elijah cups, sets of Miriam's and Elijah cups and Seder plates. When you make something like that, you want to both look at the design of it, and I think of myself more in terms of as somebody who's culturally Jewish, so I put a big premium on design, and think of those aspects. And I think through that and giving nachas to somebody when they buy it is a part of being a metalsmith that really reflects to me as somebody who's Jewish. And the joy I get is when I sell a big piece, my wife always asks, did it go to a good home? And I guess I'm pretty conscientious not to sell it to anything other than a good home. But such is life.
Amen to that. Yeah, so my pieces are almost all commissioned, and I almost never have time to do just for me. And I think some of my favorite pieces were ones that the very few that I did just because they had to come out of me. But I think my pieces have three different parts. So there's the research and the coming up with the idea, which is the hardest part for me. And then there's the creation, where it's just like getting in the zone and listening to good music and following the lines. But my favorite part, I think, is the writing the description of it, because that's where the spirituality comes. And that's where I find all the symbolism and all the connections that I didn't really, some were meant to be there and some just happen magically, and I see it after it's all done, and oh wow, this is here, and this is it. And that's the magic part that writing and I love to write, so that part is my favorite part. And then I get to, and then seeing the reaction of the person I'm giving it to or who commissioned it. If I don't get to see the reaction, I feel like I'm missing something.
Great, thank you. So a question from Sherry Kara Schwartz is asking for all three. Do you feel the pieces sharing their stories as you create them? Do you feel the collaboration of you and the piece of art itself? Maybe Lisa, I don't know if you have a response to that. You're on camera.
Yes, Sherry, thank you for being here. Sherry is a dear friend of mine. I think I think in that process of finding the description, it's telling me what it's both I'm explaining what I put there, and then I'm seeing what it put there or what happened while I was creating it that just meshed. And then it's telling me what it wants to put out into the world. So I think it's a little bit of both. But I love that idea of the story. I never thought of it in that way before. So thank you.
Any of the others would like to respond to that question?
I think that when I make my work, it's way too hard to have any kind of spontaneous decisions. I have done so much research and planning and considering of the concept and how I want to address that, but there's very few spontaneous decisions in the path to getting it done.
Thanks.
I think sometimes on occasion I feel like a piece is fighting a little bit. You're fighting me, you know. None of the pieces shown have anything spontaneous, but I do sometimes make things that are more like that. Not sure how else I would answer that.
I think that the working in metalwork is so challenging and it requires so much planning in advance that the spontaneity or inspiration that comes way in the beginning. Way in the beginning when you've come up with this idea, and then it's such an intense struggle to bring all the concepts you had. That's where it gets really hard. So more inspired in the beginning than all the way to the very end.
Jim, did you?
I kind of think that I have a tendency to start larger projects and work on them to somewhere where they're probably about 60% done, and then let them sit for a couple of years. Not consciously, but they sit fallow. And by the time I get back to them, I may cut them up and rebuild from something altogether. It's a concept I've rationalized under the guise of calling it dynamic design. And I think that the metal, at least to me, Harry does a caliber of work that is, I stand in awe of the detail, the efforts and everything, things like that. I can't work like that. I left that world to work with my hands and to let nature and the things take their course. And so to me, the metal and I have to have some conversations as time goes by and see which way they want to go. And I do a lot of my work with a hammer, and the hits are not as exact as with and nor do they need necessarily to be as exact. So I am much more free with the metal and let it go where it wants to go, and then try to improve upon what it wanted to do.
Thank you. So we have a question from Amy Cassiola, who asks, how would you distinguish between art for synagogues and ritual art for individuals?
Well, since I'm on camera, I think at one level, the most basic level, perhaps it's a question of scale. you can't make a Kiddush cup necessarily that you're going to have in your house that may be 4 to 5 or 6 inches tall and expect the same Kiddush cup to work in a congregation that seats 500 to 1,000 people. People just won't be able to get it. They won't be able to come along and to gather some of the majesty that you perhaps would have gathered by it or something like that. Also, a lot of times when you're working and I think when you're working on designing something for a synagogue, you have a lot of different critics and bosses that also change very much what you want. Is the community needs to agree on everything, and that may be all the community, or may just be 2 or 3 people in the community. So that changes I believe would change your approach to the activity. In either event, the object is to give something the synagogue wants tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. I would, a guy by the name of Claude Rydell, who's in the book, and he also just published a book. All he makes is Ner Tamids. And his work and how he approaches dealing with synagogues is really something that somebody should anybody interested in that should really take a look at, particularly his book where he talks about it and gets an idea of how he goes about planning to build for a synagogue, because he doesn't make anything. He makes individual Ner Tamids for people who have their own shuls and synagogues on their property and things like that. But for the most part, he's building for major institutions. And so his approach is very interesting and very particularly thoughtful, given the nature of the product. Very, very thoughtful.
Anybody else would like to respond to that question?
I was going to respond. For me, if I'm working with a synagogue, I'll usually want to go to that synagogue. I want to meet the people that work there, look at the architecture, talk to the rabbi, speak about the core values, talk about how the piece is going to be used. And oftentimes those pieces reflect the congregation a lot more than myself. In fact, sometimes they ask me to bring in a little of me because so much of it is them. So I'm looking at architecture, I'm looking at textures and colors and shapes of the rooms, and also I agree about scale, like a 3-foot menorah, I wouldn't make that for someone's house. And then just to say, most of the pieces that I make for individuals, I really make for myself, honestly, and that I like and that I believe in and have something to share about and something I believe in and something that resonates for me, in hopes that because we're all human and we're all sort of linked, that other people, it will resonate for them as well. So it's much more about myself as opposed to that community.
Okay. Anybody else?
I can't speak to this question because I don't really create art for synagogues so much.
So, all right. Well, this has been just such a wonderful program, and this was just an absolute delight to see your work and hear you talk about it. So thank you so much, and thank you, Jim, for people don't realize that the work that goes into creating a book, just like the work that goes into creating a piece of art. And thank you for making this and for giving a new venue for this work to be seen, especially since it transcends region and we're seeing material from all over the world. So it's wonderful. So we will send you we'll send everybody an email tomorrow or the next day with a link both about the book and about the websites of the individual artists, so you can explore more. And I just want to thank all of you, and thanks both the audience and presenters. This has been just such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank
Starving
you.
artists, thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Okay, bye-bye, and be safe and be well, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.